Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories about inflation, some about housing, some about how gas prices are coming down, and also talking about the overall theory of inflation and how it's stripping you of your wealth. And, of course, we went today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So, when you hear some of the policies coming out from this election cycle, are you reassured that inflation will go down, or are you trepidatious, or is there somewhere in between? Throw it down in the comment sections. I want to know what your opinions are. But that's enough about the election cycle stuff. Let's actually get into some of the meat and potatoes. So, this article, first one comes from Politico. Headline reads, "America is not a museum. Why Democrats are going big on housing despite the risks." And when I first started hearing some of the Kamala Harris proposals for the housing issues and subsidizing some of these first-time homeowners and trying to make sure that people actually are able to get a house, which has always been a quintessential part of the American dream, I first said, okay, sounds like the price for houses are going to go up. Then someone pointed out, well, it's probably more like the price for housing that is more of like a starter house, more of the first family, maybe one kid kind of thing, that will go up and everything else won't necessarily be affected, which is fair enough. But when we subsidize something with the government, then guess what? The market learns to absorb that extra cost. It realizes people have a little bit more money to spend on this sort of thing, so people can actually start asking a little bit more. And also, if you give a whole bunch of people a lot of money and they're able to chase after the houses that are already out there, the demand is increasing. Therefore, the supply, if it doesn't change, the price is going to go up. So why are the Democrats pursuing a policy like this? One, it's very popular with Gen Z. And when I say that, I'm not saying all Gen Z is sitting there like, yes, give me money, give me money, give me money. They're not necessarily thinking about, hey, just give me the money. What they're hearing is a proposal to actually allow them to buy a house. That's what they're worried about. They're not necessarily saying, oh, it's about free money. It's about this actually allows me to achieve my goal. So I'm not trying to say that Gen Z is just sitting there being money grubby, so on and so forth. That's not their first thought. Their first thought is, okay, I can actually start to build that American dream that we mentioned just a minute ago. And there are some of us in the Gen Z who may say, whoa. First off, I don't necessarily want your money. But then they're going to be forced into this situation more than likely. If they're a first-time homeowner and everybody else is getting that $25,000 subsidy, then the prices are going to go up relatively similar, to $25,000. So then you're left out of the market. You're sitting there like, oh, shoot, well, to even be in the ballpark now, to even be in the conversation, I need that extra $25,000. So they're obviously swinging for the fences here because this is a policy that comes with lots of repercussions, and it definitely is a policy that's going to get lots of criticism. So what is the idea behind it? Quote, top party leaders are leaning into what's long been a perilous issue for the Democratic Party in response to voter outrage over the crunch of housing supply and the rising costs of homes and rents. At the Democratic Convention, leaders including Kamala Harris and Barack Obama built on existing momentum in both red and blue states, including Harris's home state of California, and called for an overhaul of local zoning laws that act as barriers to new and cheaper housing, but the federal government has limited influence on these rules. So this is the other approach that they're taking. It's not just, hey, let's give out some free money. It's also, we're going to make a top-down approach to try to change some of these things. And actually, what the article describes here is the federal government only has so much control. There are proposals from both sides, the Republican ticket and the Democratic ticket, to actually start selling off a little bit of extra federal land to help and alleviate some of this land crunch for building new houses. But that's not what they're talking about specifically here. What they're talking about is trying to crunch down on the federal level and change how zoning works, or possibly create maybe a revenue stream. Let's be clear, this is speculation because it's a lot of rhetoric. But one idea would be, okay, we're going to provide extra funding to states in order to bring in developers into these localities to pay people maybe a little bit more money, or to actually allow whether it be through subsidies, whether it be through persuasion, whether it be through negotiating tactics, whatever, to get some of these local municipalities to allow more construction. And that's what this article is talking about when it goes into the local focus. It's saying, well, the problem is not just when the federal side of things is trying to get involved, but local people are saying, meh, I don't really know. Do I want to build a housing community next to my property? Is that going to lower my value? Some people are always afraid when they start hearing about subsidized housing that there's going to be a less than stellar apartment building built somewhere near them that brings down their property costs. So there's a lot of people saying, not in my backyard. Hey, you can do it over there, just not in my backyard, which is one of the main reasons that people are locked out of building new affordable housing inside cities. Now, the thing that I would argue is say, don't build them near the cities. Don't even build them near the current suburbs. Maybe build them a little bit further out. Maybe instead of having a whole bunch of cookie cutter houses that you put into one giant suburb that's close to a city so it has access to transit, maybe build it a little bit further out, and we encourage people to move out there, have a little bit more space. Then again, that obviously is more expensive because, one, you're not just building the same house over and over again. You have to travel further distances to get your equipment from one house to the next if you're doing it with maybe 5 acres per house. So I understand there's a lot more complicated things. I think the argument should be we should encourage people to move away from the cities in general, but that's just my personal opinion. But the idea that they're really focusing on is that localities do not necessarily want this. Even if the federal government comes in and tries to persuade them, brings in some really good builders and some contracts for them and basically says, hey, we've worked with these guys before, line up some of these things, which is the federal government getting too involved in localities anyway. But in theory, if you're going to go to the absolute maximum of getting the federal government involved on the local level, that's probably how you would go about it, then you have to ask the question whether or not these localities will actually be willing to let in these sort of subdivisions, let in these types of new housing in order to actually expand their community, but possibly come with risk. Because guess what? Maybe they add all these new houses, a whole bunch of people move in, it becomes a pop-in neighborhood, and their property value shoots up tenfold. You have to make that argument to those people because on the other end of that is their property value goes in half. Maybe even just falls by 1/4. And that's what people are feeling they're going to sell when they get older. That is actually their retirement plan. Maybe they don't necessarily have money in the stock market. Maybe it is all really tied up in their housing value. And they're thinking, well, hey, I wanted to sell this when I got older, maybe downsize, go to a smaller house, move into a retirement community. And this was going to be my lifeline. Like, you are literally messing with the value of people's property by trying to interject here. And of course, people are going to sit there and say, hey, whoa, stop. What you're doing is not just affecting the market for these other people. You're directly coming at my interest here. You're coming for my property, or at least the value of my property. So, of course, there's going to be a big push against it. But there's a little bit more to the story from the federal side, some of the proposals that the Democrats are putting out there. So let's jump back to those rather than staying really hyper-localized. Quote, affordable housing has to be top of the agenda, Adrien Todman, who leads the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, said at the CNN Politico Grill at the DNC, adding that we need to be doing everything we can to break down those barriers that have contributed to a housing shortage in the millions. So, how do you actually do this from the federal level? We talked about subsidizing, we talked about getting involved, we talked about selling off some federal land. How else do you go about this? Well, maybe what you do is say, hey, Dallas, we're really thinking about building out XYZ facility there. We want to build a new FBI headquarters. And you don't necessarily say quid pro quo, because obviously that is illegal and that is basically trading for favors. But you say, we're thinking about new locations for our FBI building here, and we're going to obviously need new housing. We're going to need new facilities, and obviously it's not going to account for every single federal agent that may work at that new facility, but you can strategically place some of these buildings around and have cities say, okay, hey, maybe we need to change the zoning here, here, and here so that more housing can be built there. But otherwise, it's a little hard because the article from Politico keeps going into it. Quote, the specific push for zoning and land use reform highlighted by Obama's DNC call to, quote, clear away some of the outdated laws and regulations that make it harder to build homes has been bubbling up from the state level for years. California and San Francisco in particular have become the poster child for unaffordability. And what they go on to do here is actually talk less about this federal policy, but actually just the sheer power and force of will that the federal government can have and federal politicians can have when pushing their agenda, and actually giving a little bit of leeway to the local politicians who may change their position because, oh, hey, well, wait, you're telling me if you go to your local municipality meeting and you say, hey, I know this is unpopular, but we need to possibly change some of these zoning laws, and people start backlashing at you in some of these cities that praise Obama or even praise Trump, and then you tell the people, wait, hold on, you're coming at me for trying to actually follow through on something that Obama was talking about, that Trump was talking about. It could provide a little bit of political cover in these areas to actually change policy. Now, I think that's a little bit naive because, once again, I talked about how this is directly influencing people's property value. I mean, I don't care how much you praise Obama or how much you praise Trump. And even if they came and asked you personally, oh, I need you to take basically a 5% pay cut in order to get by, not everybody's going to do that, okay? Not everybody's going to say, oh, yes, you know what, Mr. President, I respect your opinion so much. I idolize you so much. Your policy agenda was so beautiful. You did so much, blah, 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 blah. I'm actually going to worry and risk losing some property value in order to make sure that you have a politically salient message. I'm sorry, that is not going to run well. But Politico's just throwing out a whole bunch of different ideas here because, like I said, the federal government itself cannot necessarily go in and just say, no, this zoning, you have it zoned for industrial. Well, all the industrial parks there are either not taking up the entire area or they're kind of old and dilapidated. Let's tear it down and turn it into a suburb. Let's zone it for housing. They can't just jump in there and do it. This is why it's an extremely hard issue to address on a federal level. And that's why I think, honestly, besides the subsidies that are being proposed for first-time families or housing buyers, I think it's it's not a null and void conversation. It's a null and void promise. To pretend as though you can actually affect change there is promising something that will not happen. What really needs to happen is look at Florida, look at Tennessee, look at Texas, even look at Arizona, look at maybe a few places in Washington, not necessarily over the last 5 years, but before that, when they were experiencing a large growth, especially with a lot of Amazon employees going there was economic power being mobilized within those states. More people were going there for jobs. There was a higher demand for it. The builders could actually see, okay, hey, there's a promising future here where somebody's not going to try to come in and undercut us and build more affordable housing and possibly lower the property values. This is segmented for us. We have enough people that actually want to buy it. There's demand here in this market. There's enough demand, and guess what? We're creating the supply so we can actually control the flow a little bit and make a little bit more money. All of these factors have been very present in Austin, in Dallas over the last few years, even in places like Orlando and in Nashville. I mean, if you go to Nashville now, I drive through Nashville quite a lot. Now, not as much as I used to, but I drove through Nashville a lot last year, and I will tell you, there is always construction going on in Nashville. There is natural demand for these sort of things. Is demand keeping up? Is supply keeping up with demand? Not necessarily. And that's something that has to be addressed on the state level. But in order for states to actually address it, you have to be able to assuage the voters and say, this is not just going to be something we throw in there as affordable housing. It's going to be something that is well thought through, that is actually going to increase the property value, not decrease it. And also, you have to assure your people that the market's going to stay stable enough and they're not going to overdo it by producing too many houses and therefore actually crash the value or lower the value because there is too much supply in the market of your house. So it has to be done in a balanced way. And this has to be done on the local level. It has to be done on the state level, but even more than that, it has to be done on the local level. And that is one of the main things that could actually drive or is driving housing inflation, which is demand is like, go, 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 go. I need. And the supply side has been slow to respond. The states weren't necessarily ready to actually take a large influx in. Other states were not necessarily ready to have a whole bunch of people leave, meaning the supply was so large and yet people who were actually trying to sell them or trying to rent them are expecting previous prices that aren't necessarily feasible. So there has to be some sort of adjustment within the market, and it hasn't quite happened yet. And I don't think that federal policy is going to be the one that actually knocks that domino over. It has to occur naturally. And when I say it has to occur naturally, technically the Fed could, never mind. We could go into how the Fed could manipulate the currency and actually affect interest rates enough that it could artificially induce that sort of domino falling. But I think the best way is that the market starts to respond and we start to see prices come down naturally in the places that are currently losing customers, such as your more blue states, or even some places like Richmond. Richmond's starting to, then again, it's a little bit of a mix because you have lots of people coming in from the college side of things, so you're always going to have a relatively interesting demand there. But overall, the population of Richmond isn't necessarily growing like some people had projected back in the day, and the supply is pretty even. You're seeing prices level out for the most part. Then again, it's much more expensive than, if you're looking 30 years ago, 20 years ago, probably even 10 years ago. So maybe that's not the greatest example, but it's not continuing to escalate. It's not never ending. Like, oh, okay, the demand is just so outrageous that we can just go, keep raising. For the most part, the raises in prices have actually stayed relatively steady with inflation over the course of the last few years. So obviously, this is something that is way more than one-dimensional, way more than two-dimensional. I would say it's even way more than three-dimensional. There are so many different factors to this. So to pretend as though the federal government is going to be able to solve it is not naive, because there are things that they could do to affect things, but I would say it's a long shot. I don't have faith in the federal government to solve this issue for people, and that's why I think it's just talking points. But when it comes to major talking points, we can't ignore the point about inflation, because obviously this is one that both sides have tried to tackle. Biden has said that it's greedflation. He said that's a supply chain issue. He said at one point it was going to be transitory. Trump has basically come in and said it's all Biden's fault. He didn't open up the economy fast enough. Republicans are blaming it all on Biden, trying to really piss off the Saudi Arabians, and then they're actually trying to lower the amount of oil that they're drilling in order to tighten the supply, therefore increase the demand, or at least keep the demand level while the supply decreases. Therefore, the price of the oil goes up. So these sort of things have directly hit these messages have directly hit the ears of the people, while the inflation has directly hit the pockets of the exact same people. Well, guess what? We're starting to see a little bit of relief as we go into this election season, and I want to bring you this because while it is a little bit too minutia, a little bit too detailed, I did actually see this today. I saw some of the first prices under $3 that I've seen in quite some time. Then again, I have been in Virginia, and also specifically in more of the northern part of Virginia where prices are going to be a little bit higher. I was in Mississippi, and I saw some pretty low prices. I was like, oh, okay. And then I was actually on the phone with somebody, and like, it's actually even lower here in Kentucky. I was like, whoa. Okay, cool. I guess that I just hadn't been fully aware of what was going on in other places. And obviously I had noticed the prices coming down. I was like $3.19. That's a little bit lower than it used to be here in Virginia. But we're starting to see an even more precipitous drop. Quote, gas prices dropped again on Monday as the average price for a gallon of regular gas fell from $3.35, according to AAA. This was a decrease from the average price for a gallon of regular gas last week, when it was $3.41. So that's a pretty big drop. Now, we need to ask the question, which ones are really pulling up the average? And Hawaii is sitting pretty high on this list. So they actually saw it drop to about $4.64. At its highest, it was somewhere around $4.65. And a month ago, and I say its highest during this week, a month ago, it was almost at $4.70. So they still have some of the highest prices. Oklahoma is doing really well. They're down near $2.88. So Mississippi and Oklahoma aren't too far off, and Kentucky's not too far off, and Virginia is also starting to see some decline. So why is this happening now? Well, one, I think that overall the supply chain issues have been resolved for a little bit. We were releasing some oil from the strategic reserve. Then again, I think we've slowed that down, especially as we started to see the natural reactions to a little bit of extra supply come in. But also, there have been some projections or some talks from Biden and some Democrats that we don't actually want to go after fracking, that they don't actually want to how should I say it kindly? They don't want to go after. I was going to say a word that you two may not like. They do not want to cut off at the knees, oil companies within the United States. There's been a little bit of a change in language, less of a focus on environmentalism specifically within this campaign from towards the end of Biden's time, but also specifically as Harris has come in. So there's an idea here that, okay, maybe there is a brighter future for oil here in the United States. I think that could actually play a pretty good or a pretty large role in it. You may be saying, well, Alex, why does it matter? I mean, why does it matter if companies think that they'll have a good time here in the United States or not? How does that affect gas prices now? Let me ask you a question. If you think that the next 4 years are going to be rough and tumble, you're going to make certain investments, you're going to try to, how should I say, basically defend yourself. So you're going to throw extra money into different sectors. You're going to move away from refining oil at the same rate, because if it's going to be cut off anyway, if there are going to be restrictions on how much you're able to actually mine, maybe you start scaling back some of your operations now. There's also the speculation in the market, which causes their prices on the stock market to crash, which means they have to tighten their belt a little bit more. There are all these different factors. But at the end of the day, one of the responses is, okay, we might have to raise prices a little bit now, or just because of the natural causes or effects of slowing down production, preparing for a different administration to come in that would be more restrictive, then you can see the price start to go up. And also the inverse is true. If you believe that there will be a friendly administration to oil that will get into the presidential seat, then you're probably saying, okay, we can start ramping up production a little bit. We'll actually have more free reign, so we can start getting some of these plants open. We can at least start getting the infrastructure in place, which as things start to ramp up a little bit more, you produce more. The economies of scale allow you to actually have a more efficient process as you produce more, and then you can have prices lower a little bit. Obviously, supply chain issues are a whole other thing. Like I said, releasing the strategic oil reserve is also a whole other thing. But people, especially in a time when we just talked about high housing costs, we were just talking about overall inflation, groceries are still up. I mean, core CPI is still pretty, I don't want to say sticky, but it's definitely not coming down anytime soon, so it's still higher than people would like. And when gas was also up there, the most essential fuel or driver of our economy, it actually ripples through. So if gas is more expensive, because guess what? A lot of our food, a lot of our different products come through trucks. If gas is more expensive, that means, and even like diesel, if all of these different fuels are more expensive, then guess what? Even though that cost is distributed across all of the products within that truck, you're still paying more in order to ship those products. The truck is paying more for that gas, which is allowing the products to get where they need to go. You're increasing the overall price. Even if you split it up across 100 different products that are in the back of that truck, you're still seeing overall price increases. So people are probably going to be very happy when they start to feel the effects of this, especially gas. And honestly, there could be an argument made that that's why releasing some strategic oil reserves, especially going into this period, was especially important to make sure that people have a more favorable view of the current presidency, or at least the party that's in power. There was speculation that, that's the only reason that Joe Biden's doing it. That's also one of the reasons that the Fed's announcing rate cuts. All of those things can be true, and they can still not really matter, because at the end of the day, if you want to be conspiratorial and say, well, this is exactly why they're doing it, they're playing a game, fair enough. Whatever you want to think. Does it really matter? No, because the implications are exactly the same. The practical outcome is exactly the same. You deal with the game as you get it. And people are going to be happy that their prices are coming down. So if you're thinking about it from a political angle, get over it. Message on it, talk about the inflation, whatever, but you just need to get over it, because it's a practical reality, and people are going to be happy, because at the end of the day, less money is being stripped away from them in their everyday costs. But that doesn't mean that inflation hasn't stripped wealth away from them, and it doesn't mean that it won't in the future. That's what our final article is going to be about. This one comes from Daily Signal. What watered-down wine and inflation have in common? And this is a really short one, but I think the analogy here works really, really well. And I want to actually highlight both of the major quotes from here. So let's take a step back and let's go into this overall argument. What does inflation do? It decreases your purchasing power. Your $1 today cannot buy the exact same amount of eggs tomorrow if inflation is occurring. So right now. You have $1 and you can buy one egg with it. And then guess what happens? Inflation, okay? Then that egg, the next day, it actually costs $1.10. And you still have your $1. You haven't actually kept it in a savings account that adjusts for inflation or that is providing you interest that would be equal to inflation. You still have that one physical dollar, okay? And you go to exchange it, and then you got to find that extra 10 cents somewhere. So your purchasing power has decreased. So that's why this analogy of watering down the wine is so potent, because you're actually taking away some of the substance. You are, instead of being told, yes, this $1 is worth exactly this amount of X product, or it is exactly equivalent to X in legal tender, so on and so forth. Because guess what? I mean, $1 is going to be $1. So even if you say, this $1 is worth X, Y, Z, it doesn't really matter. Like, this one bill is worth $1, that means nothing. Okay, so at the end of the day, you have to compare it to products or goods and services. That's why there's some conversation about BRICS actually having their currency pegged to a group of commodities in order to have it be a little bit more price balanced. But the point being that $1 compared to a certain commodity, a certain good, is how you can actually determine whether or not the value of your dollar is going up or down. If that basket of goods gets cheaper to buy, and what I mean by that is if it cost $1 before and now it's $9.75, we're actually experiencing a little bit of deflation. You are actually gaining purchasing power with that $1 that you have kept in your savings account. And I already provided the other example of inflation. Just like when you pour water into wine, if you put water into wine, the potency goes down. And if you can somehow extract water from that wine, the potency goes up. So you're actually getting a little bit more bang for your buck with the wine. With a little bit less water, you're getting a little bit more concentrated wine, the pure thing. Versus if you put more water in there, you're actually getting what may appear like more wine on the surface. Because you may be saying, look at that, the cup looks a little bit higher. But is the wine as potent? No. Does it have the same power? No. Just like the power stripped away from the dollar. And I know you're saying power. Potency is probably the best way to put it. So let's go through the quote here. Quote, when the Federal Reserve creates money, it's like you're pouring water into wine and you're literally watering it down, Antony says. So yes, you now have more wine per se, but you don't have the same concentration of alcohol. So if you were to, as a bartender, pour this out in a bunch of glasses, you are now cheating each of your customers on exactly the amount of water you have put into all of their glasses. That's essentially what the Federal Reserve has done by creating literally trillions of dollars in just a few years in order to finance the runaway deficit spending we've seen here in Washington. And this is an extremely, extremely key point. Because when the government spends more money, they have to somehow fund it, whether it be printing more money, whether it be actually betting on our future by selling bonds, so on and so forth. But especially when printing money, that is what is going to devalue your money that you currently have. You may be asking, why? If China wants to buy US dollars in order to have it as a reserve currency, and there's actually more dollars in circulation, that means that there is more supply, meaning that the demand for them is a little bit lower, so they can get them at better exchange rates. They can get them for a different amount of yen. And if there is less, if there's a really tight supply of US money, we're actually taking more bills out of circulation than we're putting in, then the price in Chinese yuan, it's not yuan, it's RMB. If you have the price in RMB, Chinese RMB, it's actually going to start to go up instead of go down, because the supply on our side is actually starting to shrink a little bit. And therefore, the people that are still chasing over that same good, that same commodity, in this case, we're treating the US dollar like a commodity because they're trading it, they're holding it, so on and so forth, then you have more people, or the same amount of people chasing after a smaller supply, this price is going to go up a little bit. And when we just start printing money in order to spend and finance some of these deficits, guess what? There's more money in circulation. And when there is more money in circulation, you have more money chasing fewer goods. I keep saying fewer goods. That's not fair. The same goods. you have more money out there. You have more money in the hands of people able to purchase those exact same things. So instead of 3 people at the table who have the money to afford that brand new apple, oh, we love those really shiny apples. Now there's a 4th person who got a little bit of a government subsidy, has a little bit of extra money because it's flowing through the economy. Maybe they made some money on the stock market, whatever it may be. Now you have a 4th person at that table, which means that the price for that apple may actually go up because more people are demanding it. The demand for it is higher. So the seller is saying, okay, hey, I can actually get a little bit more for it. And the people who are trying to buy it, they are saying, well, okay, maybe I have a little bit more money in my pocket, so I'm actually able to pay a little bit more for it. And even though the value, the purchasing power of their dollar has gone down, they feel like they have more money in their pocket. So we don't actually want this to happen because at the end of the day, it strips away your power to purchase goods. If the price of goods continues to go up and you still only have that $1, you can buy less tomorrow than you could today, from our very first example that I mentioned here. So that's why this is really important. And I think it really ties together this idea of inflation really well. I know I used to go on long rants about inflation, and I really wanted to save this one for the end because I know that most people don't actually enjoy, having a basic understanding, not a basic understanding, of being basically taught this thing or having this repeated to you, even though you know what this is already. Come on, if you've made it this far, you are politically aware. You're not even remotely unaware of how any of this works. But I thought that analogy was very beautiful, and I thought it was very simple, and that's why I wanted to bring it to you, not so I could just have a whole rant about economics. Then again, if it's your first time and you've made it this far and you just wanted to learn, thank you for joining. If you're one of the people that has heard one of my mini rants, I'm sorry I did it again. But with all that said, let's jump to our daily delight. This one comes from Parade Pets. German short-nosed pointer instructs mom to pick up his crying baby in sweet clip. And honestly, this dog having the back of the baby, trying to help out the mom, it's kind of adorable. Honestly, if I had a dog like this, I might be like, hey, whoa, stop. Okay, hey, you don't need to direct me. You don't need to tell me how to do my job. But at the same time, I would think it's absolutely adorable. That's basically looking out for its little brother. So if you want to see that clip or read about it, or you want to read any of today's articles, there'll be a link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.